Welcome to Costume Construction 1 Distance Learning. So today we're going to be sewing up the pajama pants. Just a couple of introductory notes. One is just remember when you made your own patterns you had a pencil line that you drew that you would be sewing on. On this pattern piece there is no pencil line. So you have to eyeball the seam line, which is going to be at 5/8 of an inch, which is about this much. So you could take your tape measure and you could kind of keep measuring it every time you sew. That can be kind of cumbersome. So we are going to create a little seam gauge, a little piece of paper that you can use to measure where you're going to be sewing. So we'll do that next. I'm now going to create a gauge that I can use to measure my seam allowance as I'm stitching. So I have this piece of cardstock here. I'm probably not going to use this whole 8.5 by 11 because it's going to be complicated to manipulate. But first I want to draw out my 5/8 inch seam allowance, my 3/8 inch seam allowance, and a 1 inch seam allowance that we're going to be using for the hem of our pajama pants. So you can either use a tape measure to measure this out, or if you have a ruler, you can use a large ruler to measure this out. I always keep like a little 6-inch ruler for small measurements, so I'm going to use that. So basically I'm just going to draw a line across the edge of my cardstock. And I could use a Sharpie. I'm going to do 5/8 inch. And the Sharpie looks good. Can you see that? Here. But it's very, very thick, and it might become confusing when you have like a tiny thread and you've got this big fat line. So I think I'm going to use a pencil instead. So I'm going to flip this around and I'm going to do my 5/8 inch seam. I'm going to do it here like that, and maybe I'll also draw a second one. And I'm going to be very sure that it ends exactly at 5/8 of an inch. And I'll write 5/8 just as a reminder. And then underneath that I'm going to do my 3/8 inch one. So again I'm going to find the 3/8 of an inch on here, and I'll do it, mark it twice, and I'm going to write 3/8 inch. And then lastly I'm going to do the 1 inch here and here. I'm going to write 1 inch. So I got 3 measurements, and I'm just going to cut this out right around my 3 measurements so it'll be easier for me to use this when I have my sewing pieces. There's something called a seam gauge that you can purchase commercially, and it will help you consistently measure your seams. So you can see here it has this little blue slider, and that can slide up and down, and then it gives you exactly that distance, and you can adjust that. But we're just going to use a humble piece of cardstock to create our seam gauge.